the more time I spent with her, she was like in this teenage crush situation with this guy who went to her church.
No kidding.
She just kept bringing up his name, and she had talked about him in the past. When we lived here, I had gone to this church. He was a pretty prominent member of the church. I knew him. I knew he was a super nice guy, and I knew they were in the same Sunday school class, but she started really acting like a teenager. Like they were in the middle of this little teenage crush.
She was swooning.
Situation. Yeah. Yeah. With this guy in his 80s. And it was really weird.
I bet.
But here's the real kicker that was so devastating to my sister and I. This man was married.
Dimensions of Dementia is an educational video series from the Alzheimer's Association Greater Cincinnati Chapter. Join us each week for personal stories, engaging conversations, and educational content exploring issues such as caregiving, identifying warning signs, dealing with disease symptoms, and latest advances in diagnostics and treatments.
So welcome back to another episode of Dimensions of Dementia. I'm Dayna Ritchey. I'm the program director for the Greater Cincinnati and Miami Valley chapters of the Alzheimer's Association.
And I'm Andrew Pitlick. I'm the director for the Cincinnati Tri-State Walk to End Alzheimer's.
Yeah, we both have kind of long titles.
They're I'm glad I don't have to write it out every single time I send an email, but
exactly. Yeah. But we wanted to do this podcast together because not only do we work for the Alzheimer's Association, actually for us, we both work at the association because of our mothers and the connection we have the disease with our moms. So my mother, Peggy, died of Alzheimer's in January of 2021. She was 78 when she passed.
And my mom, Terry, died at the age of 69 in January of 2024 after being diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at 59.
Yeah, which is a shame and rare. You know, most people do think about this disease kind of as sometimes I hear blue-haired disease,
sure,
or senior citizen disease, but unfortunately it can impact people younger.
Absolutely.
And can be a barrier to them getting accurate diagnosis sometimes because they are young.
In this work, I've met a couple of people in their 40s.
Yeah. It's really sad situation, an unexpected situation. So we wanted to dedicate the first couple podcasts just to talking about the 10 warning signs, because that's a question we both kind of get out in the community a lot, is how do I know the difference between normal aging and something I should talk to my doctor about. So
yeah, and an important part of being able to respond to the disease is being able to get a diagnosis early on.
Right.
And so if you know these symptoms, you're going to have a better chance of being able to respond constructively to something like this. But the 10 signs for early detection, the first one being memory loss that disrupts daily life. Not just, oh, this is frustrating, but oh no, my day is absolutely stalled.
Yeah.
A second one would be challenges in planning or solving problems. Third would be difficulty completing familiar tasks. Number 4 is confusion with time and place, which you were talking a little bit in the previous episode about your mom's experience with time and place. Number 5, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships, which was a telltale sign for my mother. 6, new problems with words in speaking or in writing. 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace your steps. So not just, wondering, oh shoot, where did I put my wallet? But not being able to actually go back through the actions that got you to that point so you can retrace and find it. Number 8, decreased or poor judgment. Number 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. And number 10, changes in mood and personality. So we were talking a little bit earlier about your mom's situation with time and space at Thanksgiving, but there were other things that kind of alerted your family to something changing within your mom, and bringing the worry out of you guys.
Yeah. So I have said before, the Thanksgiving incident.
My
mom.
What family hasn't had a Thanksgiving incident?
Right? So if you didn't hear the podcast previously, my mom came to Thanksgiving lunch at 3 a.m., a whole thing. But for most families and for us as well, there once we figured out what was happening and she got a diagnosis, we realized, oh, so a couple years before when this odd thing happened that we just kind of sloughed off as midlife crisis or whatever, or, stress or what. So you kind of start putting some dots together, connecting some dots there. And a lot of people, I do get to speak out in the community a lot about the disease and the warning signs and sharing my mom's story. And a lot of people have actually heard the Thanksgiving incident if they've heard me talk before. But the one I've never really talked about before that I think's important for people to realize is the poor or decreased judgment.
Sure.
A lot of times we think about that with money and scams, and there's definitely a little bit of that going on. But that, as well as personality change, there were signs and symptoms that we did not realize. So when my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the Thanksgiving incident happened when I was living in Arkansas and my mom was living in Northern Kentucky. So the summer before that Thanksgiving, I came back home. I came back to Northern Kentucky. At this point, I'd been living in Arkansas a couple years. So my mom we only saw each other 3-4 times a year. So when I came into town, usually I came in July and spent a week, and my mom and I tried to spend a lot of time together. And I noticed that mom didn't want to engage in things where she would have to leave the house. She blew off a family dinner, actually. She didn't want to have dinner with me and my sister and her grandkids and everybody. And that was weird. And the more time I spent with her, she was like in this teenage crush situation with this guy who went to her church.
No kidding.
She just kept bringing up his name, and she had talked about him in the past. When we lived here, I had gone to this church. He was a pretty prominent member of the church. I knew him. I knew he was a super nice guy, and I knew they were in the same Sunday school class, but she started really acting like a teenager. Like they were in the middle of this little teenage crush.
She was swooning.
Situation. Yeah, with this guy in his 80s. And it was really weird. Like,
I bet.
She didn't want to leave the house because he would call her. He would call her like every day.
Oh, but not on her cell phone.
No, not her cell phone, because that was also something that happened in that visit. She claimed that her phone wasn't working properly. I figured out later she didn't know how to use her cell phone anymore. But he was sending her like little love notes in the mail and vice versa. I found out a couple months after that he sent her flowers.
Wow.
And she was, giddy like a 16-year-old. But here's the real kicker that was so devastating to my sister and I. This man was married. Wow. His wife was still living. She had health issues, but she was cognitively fine. Now, this all happened under this guise of like, my mom's having this little mini love affair with this other guy who's married, and my mom was a pretty straight-laced Christian woman. Like this was tabloid or soap opera
they
stuff.
frown on that in the church.
Yeah, in the 70-year-old. And so, fast forward, unfortunately, years later, I figured out he also had dementia.
Oh.
So, there's 7 million Americans out there with some type of dementia. And the two of them found each other.
Yeah.
And they did have this little love affair, but they had, and it really never went beyond the things I just talked about. It didn't get any more scandalous. I can only imagine if his wife found these cards. Like, I don't even know what all happened on that end of things, but to her this seemed appropriate. Like her judgment in this situation was just so off from the normal Peggy that it was just shocking. I mean, my sister and I were just so embarrassed and shocked and still thinking like, this is just my mom. She's been a widow for 25 plus years. She's been talking about being lonely, and now she's just reverted back to a 14-year-old with this mad crush with a married guy.
Yeah.
And we didn't realize that was a sign or symptom. That was so far out of character for her. And she continued that for months. I mean, it kind of fell by the wayside on its own. But that was inappropriateness. And there's some people, the types of dementia they had, my father-in-law had frontotemporal dementia, which first impacts the part of the brain that stores like your personality, your filters, your appropriateness or lack thereof.
Yeah.
And so for some people, the first signs or symptoms are things that are inappropriate.
I can imagine family dinners just exploding on a dime, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, some of the things weren't out of line for my mom. Like this relationship thing was not in line with her at all, but she was known to have kind of a short fuse and, be a little contentious about things and be in denial. So it was just kind of one of those things we didn't talk about. I expressed to her like that I was shocked and this wasn't appropriate, and that didn't go well. So we moved on and I went back home, and I remember telling my husband this story because he wasn't with me, but he knew this man too.
Yeah.
And we were just like, what in the world's happening? And so that was July. Then the Thanksgiving incident happens. And
in the same year, just several months later.
Same year. And my aunt, who cared for my grandmother, had been saying to us, it seems like your mom's struggling with a few things. My aunt would come and visit my mom a couple times a year, and she noticed things like she was having a hard time setting her alarm clock. Or they were measuring out a project. My mom was a seamstress, but she did a lot of little, DIY things, and she was having a hard time measuring things or adding up to measurements or following recipes.
So sort of maybe a combination of visual, spatial, as well as problem solving and those kind of familiar behaviors that change. Yeah,
exactly. But again, sometimes you just want to live in that denial too. So when the Thanksgiving incident happened, my mom had also had a fall recently. So in between these two events, the scandal and Thanksgiving, she had fallen, and it was a typical fall anybody could have. Like she tripped over something, but she didn't put her hand out. And so she fell right on her forehead, and she blackened up her eyes and everything. So we had that kind of as a positive for us to help get her a diagnosis. So we first had a conversation around, my sister expressed concerns. After the holidays, we let Christmas and everything go by. And, she was using what we had looked up because we didn't know the Alzheimer's Association. I didn't work here. So we looked up, okay, what can all these things be? And so, of course, we found dementia and Alzheimer's. We knew that was a non-start. We could not.
Yeah. That's not the direction that this conversation
cannot say,
is able
Mom,
to go.
I'm concerned you have Alzheimer's. I usually tell people, do not say, I just listened to this podcast or I read this, website. I'm concerned you have Alzheimer's. Let's go to the doctor. Nobody wants to be told.
Andrew Pitlick was reading from a list.
Exactly.
And it sounds to me like you've got a terminal illness.
And is he a doctor? No.
Yeah. I just ask people for money.
Yes. So we knew there were other things that could cause these symptoms. So I mentioned like hearing loss can cause withdrawal. The combination of these things can be caused by things like urinary tract infection, dehydration, thyroid issues, vitamin deficiencies, too much or too little of certain vitamins. And these are all things that are much more likely to happen to us as we get older as well. So we decided we're going in with that. We're going to voice concerns, but we're going to point it all into one of those things, not
we got to figure
dementia.
out if you need to take better vitamins, more balanced diet, drink more water,
something.
Let's get into it and let's figure out how do we fine tune you back to being the Peggy Hess that we know and love.
Yeah, something totally benign and treatable. So my sister, I'm still not living in the Cincinnati area, so she was the point person in this conversation, and she just asked Mom. She said, "Hey, we've been noticing some things. There were some issues around Thanksgiving, and sometimes these things happen when you start new medications or you have medication interactions. Have you started any new medications by any chance? Now, again, we got lucky because my mom said, yes, actually, I have started something within the last several months. So she let my sister look at the big long sheet that you get from the pharmacy we never read, and it was for a thyroid issue. And the warnings said, if you don't take this as prescribed, it can cause memory loss.
Interesting.
So it was like, thank God, because that was kind of the green light into
You want to hang your hat on that.
Yeah, because my sister said, here's what it says. And are you taking it like this at these times? And mom said, I can't say that I am. And then my sister said, well, and you had that fall. So we also went that direction of like, well, you did have that fall a couple of months back, maybe that's what's causing all these things. So we went, away from dementia and into something else that could be causing it and use that as the open door to go get doctor's appointments, things like that. Now, in the meantime, what I did from afar was I knew her primary care physician. And I knew HIPAA laws and that we couldn't have a conversation with her, but I knew how to email her. So I emailed the primary care and said, hey, here's what's going on. My sister's coming in with my mom. This is what they're going to tell you, but here's all the other things that are happening. I know you can't reply to this email, but if you could please just check further into these things. And, I have no proof that she read that and she did that, but my sister did say like she's very thorough about these things into some of these areas that you mentioned in your email. So, we got a little smart on that end too. And I think that helped. Mom still wasn't okay with the diagnosis, but at least then my sister and I knew what it was so we could help her live a safe life.
You can do something about that.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you're able to take that creative approach in expressing those concerns with your doctor to help spur the conversation to make sure that those concerns could be addressed.
Yeah. And like I said, we got lucky, but that's always what I recommend is try something. Your goal is to get to the doctor. Hopefully you have a good doctor. That's not just going to say it's normal aging or you're too young and can get into that diagnosis and rule out some other things and get you to that diagnosis.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for letting me share that.
Thanks for sharing your story.
Yeah. Well, this has been another episode of Dimensions of Dementia. Thank you again for tuning in.
See you next time.
If you want to support this show, please share it with others in your life who have been impacted by this disease. We can't do this on our own. For more information about the topics discussed today, or if you have questions about Alzheimer's and other dementia, please visit alz.org/dimensions of dementia, or call our 24/7 helpline at 800-272-3900. And if you want to get involved with the Alzheimer's Association through volunteering or raising funds for research, check out the links in our description.